Please join me in welcoming Mayor Vandenberg. Jake Vandenberg was elected as Tinley Park's 26th mayor in April 2017. After serving for 2 years as village trustee, where he oversaw the Planning and Zoning Commission. Mayor Vandenberg is a lifelong resident of Tinley Park and a graduate of both St. George and Providence Catholic schools. He resides in Tinley Park with his wife, Carrie, and 3 children. He and his family are parishioners of St. Stephen's Church. Mayor Vandenberg is the Chief Executive Officer and 4th generation funeral director at Vandenberg Funeral Homes, a family-owned business with locations in both Tinley Park and Mokina. So please welcome Mayor Vandenberg.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Village of Tinley Park's annual business breakfast. Historically, we've always met in person for this business event. However, we had to turn to the virtual world this year in order to stay in compliance with Governor Pritzker's COVID mandates. These certainly are unprecedented times that we're all facing, and I miss being with you all to see you in person this morning and to be able to enjoy and celebrate another year of great success here in our great village. We've got a lot of great information to share with you this morning, so let's go ahead and get started. To begin, I've broken down today's topics into several categories. These categories discuss a variety of areas within the Village Tinley Park operations. I'll add that these topics discussed today are and have been a part of my administration's top priority. The Village recently conducted a police staffing study, which resulted in the board authorizing budgeting for 12 additional patrol officers here in our village. This is an ongoing process that will take many years to accomplish. However, staying dedicated to the direction that the study provided will help advance the overall goal of creating a healthier police staff. Fire Station 47, located on 167th Street, reopened its doors in August of 2020 after a year-long full redevelopment of the site. The station is now a modern, state-of-the-art facility that provides the proper accommodations for the personnel living within it. Just as important to the new facilities, our fire department also received ISO accreditations for rating 1, which is the top rating available. Tinley is one of the only communities in Illinois to have this, and it helps you, business owners, reduce the insurance costs. This is a true testimony to the dedicated work the Tinley Park Fire Department and fire prevention do to our village. I'd be remiss if I also didn't give a humble thank you to all of our first responders who have and continue to perform selflessly and professionally during the COVID crisis. We are very grateful to all these men and women, so thank you. Community engagement. Engagement continues to be a major focus. Through our marketing department, we distribute information via a wide communications network that includes Facebook, Twitter, our weekly community email, YouTube, and surveys to solicit residential input. Village transparency is also extremely paramount, which is one of the reasons we video record and live stream all village board meetings, committee, plan commission, and zoning board approval meetings, and also audio record all other meetings. These are all filed on our village website and are available to residents and businesses alike. Shifting focus, I'd like to talk to you about downtown Tinley. Downtown Tinley Park is poised for development. We recently completed Freedom Pond, which aided in the drainage and development of our downtown corridor. In fact, our current new development projects in downtown wouldn't be possible without this. The pond also serves the Panduit TIF project, so it continues to prove its vitalness. The Creative Oak Park Avenue Playbook grant program, which I, along with village staff and with the support of the village board, created in 2018, has proven to be a great success. The principal idea behind the playbook was to make the downtown corridor more attractive, more productive for businesses and owners alike. This program is a win-win for residents, businesses, and the village, as it shows that a small investment in a business makes a much larger impact on the community's quality of life. Since its inception, we've had 10 projects approved in excess of $325,000 directly into small businesses. The available grants include code compliance, facade, retail, and signage. I continue to encourage Oak Park Avenue businesses to research and enhance your business and deploy available options via this grant program. The long wait has ended. What started under previous administrations is now a reality. The Boulevard at Central Station, also known as South Street, is progressing nicely. Phase 1 is scheduled to be completed by March of 2021. With the completion of Phase 1, key commercial space along with residential dwellings are expected to launch a rejuvenated downtown core. As I mentioned, this year has been difficult. Our special events continue to be the fabric and the charm of our great community. This year proved to be a bit challenging. However, we overcame these challenges presented and developed a successful summer event calendar. In order to mitigate health and safety concerns, we were forced to rethink and reinvent many of our events that took place throughout the summer. I'm happy to report they all seem to have been very popular and successful. Plans are underway right now to allow for a safe, socially distanced Christmas holiday celebration in December. So stay tuned. In order to keep our record of successful events, we continue to maintain a very strong relationship with the Tinley Park Chamber of Commerce and are grateful for all the great events and businesses support that they provide. Volunteerism is still alive and strong here in Tinley Park, and thank you to all of our commissioners, residents, and businesses that come together to make our community so great. Speaking of collaboration, the mayors of Tinley, Orland Park, and Mokina have recently come together to form the Chicago Southland Interstate Alliance, also known as CSIA, an alliance created to market the I-80 corridor. The alliance board meets to keep each other in the loop with progress within our respective communities, always keeping our primary goal of creating a business community along the corridor. We've launched a new website specifically for this program and are marketing to brokers interested in our community. We're in the process currently of planning a broker's breakfast as well. All in all, the village is doing fairly well given the circumstances. But shifting gears a little bit, allow me to give you a general report on the village's financial outlook. Our finances have also fared well despite the recent challenges. For fiscal year 2019, we had an unreserved fund balance available of $60.3 million. Funds represent reserves for capital expenditures, infrastructure, and other needs of the community, as well as a rainy day fund should the village be faced with the financial hardship or extraordinary circumstances that impact the ability to raise revenues, such as COVID-19. Overall, the village is financially sound and fiscally responsible with unreserved fund balances each year equal to 4 to 6 months of budgeted expenditures. This is a result of years of prudent financial management. The village is committed to funding capital projects and infrastructure through maintaining roads, bridges, drainage, water, and sewer systems, village facilities, fleet, and other specialized equipment for public safety and public works. As a matter of fact, over the past 4 fiscal years, the village has budgeted more than 32% of its expenditures to meet the needs of the community's infrastructure and other capital projects and purchases. Thankfully, because of this sound fiscal management, we were financially prepared for COVID-19 pandemic and have been able to weather the storm thus far. The village was able to address forecasted losses in revenue immediately during the onset of the pandemic in March and took proactive measures to reduce staffing resources for non-essential operations. We also eliminated discretionary spending and focused on supporting core functions. Other deductions were made by each department to delay or defer costs across the organization to reevaluate current staffing models and basically try to do more with less. These efforts on an annualized basis reduced the village's operating costs by $6.6 million. We also began evaluating capital projects on a priority basis. This allowed for an additional $14.1 million in projects to be delayed or deferred to the next fiscal year for consideration. The village also implemented a new spending plan that was $20.7 million less than the original budget expenditures to combat the estimated revenue loss that was sustained from COVID-19. Our businesses were hit hard, but thanks to the Paycheck Protection Program, nearly 900 Tinley Park businesses received $71 million in funding, saving nearly 10,000 jobs, proving that although there are strong disagreements amongst parties, government officials could come together to share a common goal. It's been a challenging year for sure, but we're nothing if we're not resilient and tenacious here in Tinley Park. In closing, I want to discuss what many interested parties are thinking about currently, and that is, well, what are the major projects that are on the horizon here in Tinley Park? We recently approved the new 159th Street and Harlem Avenue TIF district, which will help fill commercial vacancies in that area and spur development. This is long overdue, and because of the foresight of the village officials, we have positioned our economic tool to be utilized by developers within that district. Direct results from the new TIF district are the announcement of the following developments. I'm pleased to report that Pete's Fresh Market has purchased the old Super Kmart on Harlem Avenue. They're using it as a warehousing facility as they continue to grow their grocery footprint and have plans to build a grocery store at that location in the foreseeable future. Brixmor is redeveloping the Tinley Park Shopping Plaza, which is on the east side of Harlem Avenue, directly across from the old Super Kmart. The impacts of this new redevelopment have given our officials a glimmer of optimism for that retail plaza. We are very much looking forward to the advancement of this development. I'd like to add that there were 74 new businesses that opened in 2019 and 49 year-to-date here in Tinley Park, including 2 new restaurants such as Bandanas and Fry the Coop that are preparing to open. The Even Hotel brand took over the Holiday Inn property adjacent to the Tinley Park Convention Center. As you may remember, the Harp Group took over the managerial responsibilities of the Convention Center a couple years back and is in the process of converting the existing property into a new state-of-the-art hotel. You also may be aware that the 80th Avenue train station has been vacant for several months now. After a public RFQ process, we'll soon have an announcement of a new vendor who will operate the former restaurant. Now for a couple of the infrastructure projects. The 175th Street area near St. George Church is a major infrastructure project. Cook County will begin construction sometime between May and October. This administration and staff were extremely optimistic that the project will begin in 2021. We've also received $500,000 in a grant for other improvements to the Cook County roads, including 94th Avenue. The long-awaited Will County project will perform widening and reconstruction of 80th Avenue from 191st Street to 183rd Street. This is scheduled to start next year as well. And a brief update regarding the Oak Lawn water project is also progressing as planned. This is a $270 million water system infrastructure improvement that's scheduled to be completed in 2023. I'd also like to note that $750,000 in other projects for Tinley Park were included in this year's capital bill. So it's a busy time here in Tinley Park for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap. I've enjoyed sharing the state of the village with you this morning. I appreciate your understanding given the circumstances surrounding the gathering sizes and certainly all the technical difficulties this morning. It is my hope that you now have a clearer perspective on how your village is working for you. And if I may, I have a personal announcement. It has been the honor of a lifetime to represent my fellow Tinley Park neighbors and businesses. Looking back, there have been many accomplishments, some of which I've shared with you today. Recently, a local reporter asked whether or not I was seeking re-election. My primary responsibility in life is to dedicate 100% of my time, energy, focus, and love on being the husband, father, and small business owner that is expected of me. The saying of, quote, not having enough time in the day applies to me daily. This decision was easy. My family is first, no matter the scenario. Therefore, I will not seek re-election for mayor of Tinley Park. I'll leave you with this. Friends, Tinley Park is worth fighting for. It's worthy of nothing but the absolute best effort from its leaders. I feel I provided that during my administration. I fought for the future of Tinley Park, and I will continue to do so as a citizen. After all, that is our responsibility as citizens of this great country. Thank you very much for placing your trust in me to lead our great village. I will forever be grateful. God bless you and God bless Tinley Park. At this time, I'd turn it over to our village manager, Dave Niemeyer.
Thank you, Mayor Vandenberg. As you can see, a lot of things going on in our community. I'm going to focus on a couple of things, some of the COVID-19 measures that we took to assist businesses, as well as a few other project updates. So there were several things we did back in March and April as the COVID crisis began to unfold. One of the things that we did is we waived our temporary sign permit fees, as well as some of the regulations and time limits for businesses. Our liquor license holders, of course, as you remember, the liquor license businesses were all closed for a couple months. We actually waived the fee for the second 6 months of 2020. Starting in 2021, we'll be going on an annual fee. We also developed an outdoor dining program. As you may remember, again, many of the restaurants were closed for several months, so we came up with some guidelines once the governor allowed them to reopen to help them open safely and efficiently and profitably. We've also increased our communication to businesses through developing the Noteworthy News Business newsletter email, which is sent nearly every week to Tinley Park businesses. And we do hope that the information that has been helpful and timely for you. As the mayor alluded to, we did initiate a webinar series on primarily some of the federal programs and other programs that were available to help businesses that were affected by COVID. And glad to see that many of them did take advantage of the federal funding. We also created an online Open Eats directory, and this gave our residents information on what restaurants were open for carry out and able to kind of give them some guidance on where they could go and hopefully helped our restaurants. We did create a dedicated COVID-19 resource page for businesses. And finally, we did distribute PPE to over 25 healthcare providers and businesses in Tinley Park. So moving forward to update you on some of the other major projects in the village. Of course, Harmony Square is a big project, and I can assure you that there's still full funding for that. Our plan is actually completed for that. We have all the property we need except one, and unfortunately, we were not able to come to terms with the property owner. So that is in court through the village's eminent domain process. There is a hearing scheduled in January. And so we hope this moves along as quickly as possible, because it really is a key. When we have businesses that are talking to us about downtown, we're always being asked, when will that open? And so as soon as we can start that, we'll certainly be able to give you more information on that. You may remember several years ago, we, in Harmony Square was part of this, we initiated a multifaceted branding program that focused on the village's music center. And part of this was a new wayfinding sign program. And again, we had to make some decisions in spring on capital programs as well as personnel that we had to hold back on. This was one of them. But we do intend to go forward once we're past the COVID crisis. And then finally, the Tinley Park Mental Health Center, which has been a saga, to say the least, over the last several years. So as I'm sure many of you are aware from reading the media, last year the state did end negotiations. They indicated in the spring that they would restart negotiations. There has been some informal discussions. The good news is that there was legislation passed in the spring that allocated $15 million for cleaning up the mental health center. That's obviously dependent on some of the revenues coming into the state budget from gaming and other sources. But it's a positive step. We all wish this would happen much quicker, but we're obviously dependent on the state, and we're hopeful that begins to move forward very quickly. So a few other things. One of the things that the village undertook last year was an update to our strategic plan. We had initially passed a plan back in 2015, and we were able to accomplish the overwhelming majority or make significant progress on many of the goals and objectives in that plan. And so there was a new plan that was developed last year. There was business input. We had business focus groups as well as resident, employee, and a citizen survey that were part of this. And so 5 major goal areas were identified, many of the themes you've heard already today: public safety, employee development, expanding economic development opportunities, increasing neighborhood and business district stability, and community engagement and tourism. And so there's a lot more information on our website. We're going to be actually doing an update for the community in early December on our initial progress on this. And so please look forward to that. We have, as I earlier, a staff that's, I think, second to none. Our finance department recently received a comprehensive annual finance and budget award. This is the highest honor that any finance department can get. And I think it speaks to how well run our finance department is. And we've been really very fortunate. The COVID crisis has hit us, but not as bad as other communities, because we do have a lot of strength in our reserves and other programs. We have had to make some cuts and changes, but certainly not to the extent we would have if we didn't have the strong finances that we have. The last thing I want to address, many of you may have read a recent article in the Tribune about the village's interest in annexation and purchase of property at Volmer and Harlem. Unfortunately, that article contained a number of inaccuracies and misleading statements. There's a full retort to that we put on our website and Facebook page. But just to give you the bullet points, so that property at Volmer and Harlem, it's 114 acres. As has always been part of the village's planning area. We recently learned that Madison was trying to annex that property. If another town, Madison annexed it, we would have lost control of all the planning aspects of it. We would have certainly lost the revenues. And Madison would have had the ability to annex other unincorporated properties around that. So after discussions with the property owners, we looked at being able to purchase the property. That was the best way of controlling it. Ultimately, the property owner decided not to sell the property. We are in discussions about annexing it. And again, controlling the borders of your community, you really only have one shot at this. So this is an important part of our community, especially with the fact that Amazon is building a large distribution center in Madison across the street. Making sure that area develops to the standards that we want is very important, and we're going to continue to pursue the annexation of that property. So again, thank you for your time. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over back over to Jay Walsh.
Okay. Rick Matoon is a vice president and regional executive with the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Mr. Matoon's primary research focus is on issues that face the Midwest regional economy. Mr. Matoon's career at the Chicago Federal Reserve in 1990. He also serves as a lecturer at the Kellogg School of Management and Northwestern University. We are fortunate that he will share his economic insights with us today. So please welcome Mr. Rick Matoon. Welcome, Rick.
Thanks very much, Jay, and thanks everybody for inviting me to join you again today. It's a great pleasure to be here. So as usual, what I want to do today is just give you some insights as to where we think things are happening in the economy, both in terms of Illinois and Chicago. The first thing I have to warn you about is that, as usual, this presentation reflects my own views and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago or the Federal Reserve System, which is a standard disclaimer. Okay, so the first thing you should realize is that when we headed into 2020, this was supposed to be a year that was going to be really predictable. Almost all economists suggested that what we were going to have was a year of steady growth, sort of a lot along the lines of 2019, probably a tick slower. But then obviously COVID hit. And really, for economists, COVID is sort of like a black swan event. And what I mean by that is you can't really use other recessions or other downturns in the US economy to understand what's happening right now in terms of how the recovery is proceeding. It's not like the Great Recession because it wasn't, that was a largely self inflicted financial crisis. It's really not a natural disaster in a traditional sense because when you have a natural disaster, the duration's pretty well known. And the big thing I want you to realize is the impacts of this crisis are really being felt very unevenly. The fallout really depends on what industry you're in, where the geography of where the pandemic is being most felt, and even the demography of the population. And for governments, it really depends on what type of revenues you rely on. So what this is leading to is people having to sort of come up with a number of scenarios for where they think the economy is headed, and then use different forecasts to try to model that. So we go to the next slide. So if you look at a median projection, this is 9 private sector forecasts. What they saw was this very sharp contraction in the second quarter, but then a rebound. And as you can see, the size of this rebound really depends on sort of where you think the pandemic's going to play out. So you have anywhere from a 20% recovery in the third quarter to a 35% recovery in the third quarter, and then various sorts of degrees as to what the fourth quarter will look like. So if you go to the next slide. This sort of variation really suggests that there's just so much uncertainty underlying sort of any way in which we think about where the recovery is headed. The good news is right now, most forecasts are suggesting that third quarter GDP is going to be a bit better than we expected. A rebound really in the mid-20s or maybe slightly higher for the third quarter, and that'll be announced shortly. Why the optimism? Well, first was the U.S. economy ended up being more sort of flexible than we expected in terms of recovering from the restrictions that were put in place during the sort of the height of the pandemic when all the lockdowns were occurring. We've seen retail sales, car sales, and housing all above forecast, better improvement in the unemployment rate, and particularly importantly, the CARES Act really pumped up the economy. If you look at U.S. personal income growth during the second quarter, all of it was explained really by transfer payments in terms of what was occurring in terms of the U.S. economy. So the FOMC, the Federal Reserve, has also come out with a forecast as to where it thinks the U.S. economy is. And again, it's showing some improvement. So in September, the bottom line was we expected about 6.5% reduction in GDP for 2020. Now we expect that to be only about 3.7% decline. So it's still a recession, but not as sharp as we expected. As you can see, we see recovery really above trend growth in both 2021 and 2022 at 4 and 3%. We also see the unemployment rate improving relatively at a quick pace, dropping to about 4.6% by 2022. The one thing that's really also clear is we see very few inflationary pressures. Over this forecast horizon, we don't get inflation up to the 2% target that we'd like it to have. And that's going to have some implication for where we think Federal Reserve policy is going to be headed. This next slide shows you the so-called dot plot that the Federal Reserve puts out. And this is really just where each of the participants in the FOMC think interest rates will be sitting in terms of the Fed funds rate. As you can see, all the way out through 2023, they really see no change, essentially keeping the interest rate pretty much grounded at somewhere just slightly above zero. The expectation is you really won't see any moves upward until 2024 at this point, assuming that we sort of see the path of recovery. Now, what's driving this? Now, the next slide will show you is what's driving this is a new Federal Reserve monetary policy stance. And what this policy stance essentially suggests is we're going to be willing to let the economy run hotter for a longer period of time. So essentially, even when recovery is underway and there may be some inflationary pressures, we're going to try to maintain very low interest rates and let the economy sort of accelerate. So the goal here is to get to a position where we average inflation of 2% over a period of time. And that suggests that what we might be willing to do is let inflation run above 2% till we get to that average figure over a moderate period of time. So I've given you a couple of quotes from our bank president, Charlie Evans, but this just suggests how mathematically this would work, which would just suggest that if inflation ran hotter than 2%, we still would be willing to keep the Fed funds rate very low, really over a 2 or 3 year period till we get to that average period of inflation of 2%. So we would allow for somewhat of an overshoot in terms of that, and that's a new monetary policy stance. So let's talk specific about where the impact of the recession has been most noticeable. Well, it's shown up in labor markets, particularly in unemployment claims, financial markets in terms of volatility. Governments are seeing revenue declines and spending spikes and significant employment cuts. Consumers are spending, but they're still increasing savings, which suggests that maybe it's not sustainable. And then we'll talk a little bit about some specific exposed industries. So if you look at labor markets, where it really shows up is really in the unemployment claims and in the overall unemployment numbers. So what this figure is going to show you is that we've dropped the unemployment rate at a much faster pace than most people expected. We were at almost 15% in April, and now we're down to 7.9%. However, that has to be qualified a little bit. The September number also reflects the fact that lots of people just dropped out of the labor market. They've been discouraged enough that they simply aren't being counted in the unemployment statistics. If those people were added back in, the unemployment rate would be closer to about 10% right now. If you look at where these job losses have been most concentrated, this figure requires a little bit of description. So the gray bars show you the loss of jobs from February to April. So think of this as the height of the pandemic. As you can see, the losses were across every sector you can think of. The blue bars show you the sort of the recovery period where some of the restrictions were lifted from April to September. Now, as you can see, you have lots of sectors of the economy that are sort of adding jobs at a fairly rapid clip. So a lot of this recovery was underway. But in other sectors like performing arts and spectator sports, obviously, there's been virtually no recovery. Similarly in accommodations. What the dots show you is what the overall effect is, the total change from February to September. And as you can see, most of the dots indicate that most of the sectors still have job losses on net. So in most cases, we're still losing employment in many, many sectors. So the next slide shows you some of the areas of volatility. So financial markets became extremely volatile. We had this spike in the VIX, which is an indicator of financial volatility. And what you can see there is essentially during the height of the pandemic, almost closed down financial markets, but we're still at an elevated level. The next slide will show you what's happening in terms of policy uncertainty, and that's really an indicator of how confident people are about making investments over the long term. When things are very uncertain from a policy perspective, there's a good reason for people not to want to make investments. As you can see, that's what's occurring right now. We have this elevated policy uncertainty. Go to the next slide. What we're going to show you is some other dimensions of the recession, which is retail sales. So as you can see, retail sales have actually come back above where they were prior to the pandemic. And a lot of this was explained by the increased unemployment insurance payments, the $600 of additional payments that were made, sort of spiked consumer spending. Consumers also shifted to more big ticket items. And low interest rates are also helping benefit things like car sales and home mortgage refinancing and home sales. The one caveat to this really comes from the next slide, and this is going to show you that people are still uncertain as to the future, and that shows up in the personal savings rate. As you can see, the personal savings rate in August was still 14.1%. That's way above where it was prior to the recession. As you can see, that suggests that people are still trying to be a bit cautious into how they view what the future is going to look like. Now, if you look at sectors that are particularly under stress, one that's showing up is really the state and local sector. And here it shows up in government employment. So this is employment through September. And as you can see, state and local sector from September 2019 to 2020, the state government has lost 246,000 jobs, or about 5% of employment. Most of that's in state government education, which is down 9.8%. Local government is even worse. Local government has lost 872,000 jobs, and most of that, again, is in education, 570,000 jobs. So very significant. losses in employment in the state and local sector as a sector that's really under a great deal of pressure. If you go to the next slide, what I'm going to show you is some other sectors that are also under significant pressure, and that is the industries that were most exposed to COVID in terms of their employment levels. And those were mining, that includes oil industry, transportation, which includes airlines, employment services, travel arrangements, and leisure and hospitality. As this figure will show you, that is about 24 million jobs in the U.S. economy, about 16.5% of all employment. And these are all sectors that have been disproportionately exposed to this particular downturn. What I'll show you is how Illinois is doing specifically. And as you can see, these are job losses from March to August in Illinois. And it's similar to what I was showing you in terms of the national picture. So leisure and hospitality has been the most impacted. 23% of the jobs have been lost in that area. Information has lost 11%. Other services is down 9%. And then you have the other sectors that are faring a bit better. Manufacturing has been one of the stronger sectors, actually. It's only had 3% reduction in jobs. It is actually showing pretty significant recovery at this point. Same with financial activities. So how's Illinois doing in sum? Well, it's definitely lagging the country. So this is a useful indicator that's been put together by Moody's and CNN. And what it does is track sort of how close you are to full recovery relative to where you were before the pandemic started. And it has 37 different kind of indicators that are taken into effect. As you can see, Illinois ranks 47th. So we're one of the worst states in terms of getting to full recovery. We've recovered about 70% of the activity we had in early March. So again, there's lots of ground for Illinois to make up going forward. So if you think of one of the biggest concerns for Illinois, and one of the things that unfortunately are extreme outliers, it's the fiscal impact on the state. Currently Illinois is expecting to see revenue losses of about $6.5 billion from fiscal year 20 to 21. So these were revenue losses that were not anticipated, obviously. Prior even to COVID, 2 budgets were presented at the state level. One allowed for increased expenditures, assuming a graduated rate income tax is passed and goes into effect July 1. The second would reduce spending, assuming the amendment fails. However, post-COVID, other adjustments are going to have to be made. First was the first sort of opening salvo was to adopt a sort of a no cuts, maintain current spending plan. The way this was going to occur was basically by borrowing to a large extent. Illinois has been one of the only states that's borrowed from the Federal Reserve's Municipal Liquidity Fund. They've already borrowed $1.2 billion in fiscal year 20. There's an expectation that they'll borrow $5 billion in fiscal year 21. And this will help sort of float the sort of loss of revenues that will occur. They also have had an expectation that additional federal government resources would be made available. It's not clear, obviously, at this point. That's very much up in the air. There's also some expectation that there may not be fully made pension payments in the next couple of years, and that would relieve some of the cash pressure. And then we'll also continue to really sort of carry a sort of a floating level of back bills, roughly about $7 billion. This hasn't gone unnoticed. Illinois has the lowest GO bond rating in the country at BBB- with a negative outlook. We're one notch above junk. That has significant effect if we actually do fall into junk status in terms of our bond rating. So what's Illinois doing as a fallback plan? Well, again, one thing the state is asking for, and other states are asking for this too, is more ability to spend flexibly the money that was provided through the CARES Act. The CARES Act money was restricted to only COVID-related expenses. Many states have found that they can't fully spend the money that was sent to them. Some flexibility would allow Illinois to fully spend the $3.5 billion that was already provided. Again, borrowing through the Federal Reserve's Municipal Liquidity Fund seems to be part of it. And then also, an expectation or trying to build in the expectation that the graduate income tax proposal passes and Illinois gets at least $1.3 billion more in revenue over the last 6 months of fiscal year 21. If none of this happens, the governor suggested that the budget will have to be cut 5% in fiscal year 21 and 10% in fiscal year 22. So final thoughts. There's a lot to unpack right now in terms of how you think about the economy. The first thing is going forward, if you're going to have a crystal ball, you'd say that everybody's going to want to build more resilience into how they do their operations. You're going to carry larger inventories. You're going to build in more resilience in terms of your supply chains. All those sorts of things are probably going to be a sense that people want to take less risks going forward. Another thing that's going to change is probably maybe a change in the geography of where the economy is located. A lot of economic growth during the last 2 decades has been explained by packing activity into dense cities. Density was seen as a good thing. It encouraged sort of economic growth, knowledge spillovers, all sorts of things. Now there's a sense in which we're probably going to be spreading out more to other places. Suburbs are probably going to have more opportunities going forward. Teleworking is going to become a new reality, and that's going to mean you're going to have less people in mass transit on a daily basis. People are going to be working from home more on a more frequent basis, and sort of systems are going to adjust to those sorts of things. For offices, there's also going to be lots of issues for them. Probably most businesses are going to be looking for less office space, less, smaller floor plans. Everything from what's referred to as hot desking, which is people come in and be sort of assigned to a desk on the days in which they actually show up in the office. There's also the probability that you're going to have to spend more on things like health screening devices in terms of businesses to operate in the future. Similar to after 9/11, there was a lot of spending on things that were security devices. Now health screening, particularly things like upgraded HVAC systems, air filtration systems, those sorts of things are probably going to be necessary. And then the final thing I just want to leave you with is the notion that we may want to think about how we sort of protect particularly state and local governments in an economic downturn. A lot of economists have referred to this particular COVID recession as being one of an uninsurable event. There's no way a state or local government would have put together reserves to be able to support themselves in the case of a pandemic. Clearly, there's appropriate levels of savings and reserves to protect yourself against what could be considered like a normal downturn. But clearly, the role for the federal government to step in when there are these sort of unimaginable, uninsurable events is something to at least consider going forward. So thank you for your time and attention and inviting me back again, and I'll turn it over to the rest of the program.
As we wrap this up, I'd like to thank again Mr. Rick Matoon for coming on and sharing his insights. I think he highlighted quite the economic opportunity that the village of Tinley Park has in front of it. I'd also like to thank Mayor Jake Vandenberg as he outlined the progress that Tinley Park has achieved over the last couple of years. And on behalf of the ECC and Tinley Park community as a whole, I would just like to thank you and we appreciate your leadership, your energy and passion that you brought to the entire village during your tenure, not only as trustee, but also as mayor. So thank you very much for your time on that. Also, as a side note, if you have any questions, please feel free to stay on. Village staff will be available to respond if you want to use the chat box or the Q&A. So feel free to stay on. Otherwise, thank you for joining us this morning. I hope all of you have a wonderful conclusion to 2020 and looking forward to kick off 2021 in a much better fashion than where we were in this past year. So thank you very much and make it a great year.